GT7's update 1.57 is here, and as always with pretty much every single update are new events to cater towards the new vehicles added. So today I'm going to take you through all the new events on offer and give you a few thoughts and opinions throughout. So the first of the new events that was added with this update is Brands Hatch Indy for the Sunday Cup. We then go over to Tokyo Expressway Central Counter clockwise for the Japanese FF Challenge 450, and the third and final event is Deep Forest Raceway Reverse for the European Clubman Cup 600. Now let's head over to the first event of the update then. This is at Brands Hatch Indy layout, and it's the Sunday Cup catering towards the Renault Kangoo 1.4 from 2001. Now in terms of the finer details here, we have a 5-lap sprint race, very typical of the Sunday Cup. There are a total of 10 vehicles. Your car must be a road car. For first it's 37k, second is 22.2k and 14.8k for third. Now in terms of the main rival cars, we have the Kangoo, the Fit Hybrid, the Aqua S and the Demio XD Touring from 2015. Nothing really out of the ordinary here. As for car restrictions, BOP is off, car use must be a garage car and car settings are allowed. For race and penalty settings, there's no damage and no penalties set to 1 here. So let's get into the event then. Of course I'm using the brand new Renault Kangoo 1.4 from 2001, brand new to this update, and whilst I did kind of complain the fact that we've had back-to-back meme cars almost constantly this year, I did find myself actually having fun driving this thing. It's upgraded to around about 380 pp, which is actually the recommendation for this event. Now in terms of the event itself, relatively short 5-lap sprint with a total of 10 cars on track. And of course that means there's 9 AI up in front of you. Now in terms of the AI though, it's going to be very hit or miss as to how you get on in this event. So if you're one of those players that doesn't see a PP restricted event and you just go and use the fastest car you can to go ahead and get it done, then you'll have no problems here. However, if you're like me and you stick towards the recommendations and you run the game on the hardest difficulty to make it feel as rewarding as possible, you might actually be in for a bit of a tricky time here. The main reason is because of the pool of cars this event can pick from. Sometimes you'll end up with the likes of the Honda Civic EG, which is much quicker than anything else it can possibly field here. Now of course the other factor you're going to have to take into account is actually where the faster AI starts. If they start towards the back of the grid, then you're probably in for a much easier time, as again the standard AI in GT7 is pretty terrible and will just get stuck behind the slower cars like you saw with the Mini Cooper in these clips. However, if they start towards the front, there is the possibility it's going to get a pretty big gap. However, it's a very typical Sunday Cup affair, apart from maybe the track, which is actually incredibly enjoyable for these type of vehicles. So shout out to Brands Hatch Indy for this one. In the end though, as you can see, I got a relatively easy first place with an 11.9 second lead over P2. It took me around about 5 minutes to get this completed, and my fastest lap was a 59.8 second lap on the 5th and final lap. In terms of the payout though, it's really not too bad. 55,500 credits with the clean race bonus added, so not bad for 5 minutes work. Let's move on to the second event of the update then. This is the return of the Japanese FF Challenge 450, of course aimed at the Mazda CX-30. In terms of the finer details here, it's a 3-lap sprint race, a total of 10 vehicles. Your car type must be a road car from Japan with an FF drivetrain layout. First place will bag you 45,000 credits, second will bag you 27k, and third is 18k. Your main rival cars here are of course the new Mazda CX-30, Integra Type Rs, Civic Type Rs, and the Suzuki Swift. Now in terms of the restrictions, as you can see, BOP is off. Your car use must be a garage car and car settings are allowed. As for the race settings, no mechanical damage and no penalties on. However, we're actually using a track that we very rarely see in GT7 here, which is a nice touch. Now the event follows a very typical format, however I do have a few complaints. This is a track layout that we never really see, and unfortunately it's been chosen to highlight perhaps one of the worst cars for this type of track, the Mazda CX-30, which is incredibly bulky and takes up the majority of the road, which meaning overtaking at a very tight and technical track like we're on here is just absolutely ridiculous. Unfortunately, it just feels like really poor track choice to highlight one of the cars from your latest update. It really doesn't make too much sense. And my second complaint is actually in regards to the likes of the Integra Type R and the Civic Type R. typical standout cars in these type of events, and they'll usually give you a very nice battle and a good run for your money. But unfortunately, that's not the case here. Instead, they've kind of artificially nerfed them by ensuring they get caught up with so much of the traffic. Instead, the way they've actually added any type of difficulty to this event is through leaving a huge gap between the front two cars and the rest of the grid, meaning that once you get past the Hondas, you are then going to have to go all the way up to the top of the grid and eventually get that gap down to tackle the likes of the Mazda and the Suzuki Swift Sport, which seem to be always out in front here. So unfortunately, instead of getting nice, clean, close racing here, you get this artificial difficulty spike in which Polyphony have fallen back on their old habits of doing this whole chase the rabbit thing. Again, the rolling starts haven't been too bad recently, and they won't typically give an AI a huge gap in terms of its lead, but unfortunately they've kind of fell back on it with this certain event. And I think it's just a way to make the Mazda seem more competitive here, since that's the car it's going ahead and highlighting. So unfortunately, this is the weakest of all three of the new events. Now in terms of the overall time for this one, well, it's very typical of an FF challenge. 5 minutes 8 seconds 0.894 with a 7.1 second lead to P2, which was the Mazda, which continuously blocked the Suzuki Swift from actually making a move for the entirety of the 3 laps, and a fastest lap of a 1 minute 42.161. In terms of the payout, not too bad again, 67,500 credits with that clean race bonus. So let's move on to the third and final event, and it's the main one of this update. This is at Deep Forest Raceway Reverse, which is the European Clubman Cup 600. It's a 5-lap sprint race, but let's check out some of the finer details. So 5 laps, a total of 20 cars on the grid, so a nice full grid. Your car type must be a road type, and of course from Europe. Now in terms of the rewards, 75k for first, which isn't too bad, that's without the clean race bonus, 45k and then 30k. Now in terms of your main rival cars, you've got the new Vantage, Mercedes AMG, Ferrari Testarossa, and the biggest cheat in the entirety of GT7, that Alfa Romeo Giulia GTM, which is incredibly powerful. Car restrictions, BOP is off, must be a garage car, and car settings are allowed. In terms of the race settings, once again, no damage and no penalties on here. Now, of course, this event is aimed at using the Aston Martin Vantage, and that's exactly what I'm going to use, and I had an absolute blast throwing this thing around Deep Forest Reverse. Now, in terms of the grid, it is a full grid of 20 vehicles over a 5-lap sprint. However, it's very much a mixed bag, and there's going to be one specific car I'm going to talk about soon, which I've already mentioned, the Alfa Romeo, which does feature in this race and will typically make the race harder or easier depending on where it begins and depending if it gets caught up or not. However, at Deep Forest, we basically have 2 back-to-back very quick sections. Of course, the main start-finish straight, and then the big, long tunneled section in which the Alfa Romeo will make up a ton of positions. As for the rest of the grid, they are pretty easy, apart from maybe the likes of the other Aston Martin Vantage, which I got incredibly lucky with its positioning thanks to a Lamborghini Urus that acted as a rolling roadblock for the majority of this event, before it eventually broke free and did pull out a bit of a gap, leading to a nice head-to-head battle at the end of lap 4 going on to lap 5. Now in terms of the Alfa Romeo I mentioned, as you can see here, that thing will fly. It is perhaps the most notorious cheating AI in the entirety of GT7, and really if you're going to make a move, you want to be doing it under braking, as it will take a while to actually slow itself down, but thanks to 4-wheel drive and how fast that thing is, it will quite quickly get onto the back of you. So I got my positioning done, and then the thing came back at me going down the tunneled section, in which it got a little bit sideways and actually hit into the side of my car and lost me the clean race bonus. A bit unfortunate there. And then thankfully the Gran Turismo overlords must have been looking after me today, as thankfully this Maserati Gran Turismo made a slight little mistake and actually acted as a rolling roadblock for the Alfa Romeo. So with that problem solved, it was time to push on forward, in which you'll start seeing your typical lead cars for the Euro 600s, the likes of the Lamborghini Huayra, Lamborghini Countach, TVR Tuscan and the Mercedes AMG. Work your way through them and you'll more than likely run into the Aston Martin Vantage, of course new for this update and very typically leading its own event. However, I did have one big roadblock in the way to get past first, and that was the Lamborghini Urus, which is a big hefty chonker and took a while to get around. Eventually we got past it and it was time to go on and try and beat the other Aston Martin, which as you can see had started pulling out a rather decent lead, and I had an incredibly nice battle from the end of lap 4 going into the start of lap 5, but we did have a little bit of a horsepower advantage here, and I take full advantage of it, going around the outside of the other Aston and finally getting myself up into first place on the 5th and final lap. All I had to do then was keep it nice and clean for the final lap, which is exactly what we did. In the end, we took a relatively easy first place overall. Now in terms of the timing for this one, it was an 8 minute 11.206. Our fastest lap came on lap 3 of a 1 minute 37.191, and we gapped the other Aston Martin by 4.5 seconds. In terms of the payout, I didn't get the clean race bonus. Of course, the Alfa Romeo clattering into the side of me completely got rid of that, so very easy to lose it, but 75k here. And with that, all 3 of the new events are done and dusted. A huge thank you to all of my channel members on screen now. Massive thank you for your continued support each and every day, and a huge thank you to you guys watching at home. Let me know what you think of these events in the comment section down below. Honestly, in my opinion, Polyphony just need to put more of these in. I get we've got, you know, Sophy 2.1 with this update, but especially for PS4 players who might not have that feature, they really need more events added to this game that take full advantage of a lot more vehicles. But that's just my personal opinion. Anyway, huge thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Peace.